Okay, wait. Hear me out. You've probably seen this trend around where people say, hear me out, and then suggest completely bonkers, off the wall, and unhinged suggestions of people that they would date or do other things with from their favorite works of fiction. And I so often see this trend in relation to cartoons and video games. And with this trend, people are really showing off the darkest, most unhinged sides of their minds. And I am absolutely here for it. But I haven't seen it done when it comes to books. So I asked my patrons, what are your hear me out characters from fiction? Obviously, we're going to start with mine. And I'm going to ease us in with something that is almost predictable. Hear me out, Dracula. Vampires have been sexy for 100+ years at this point, but when you revisit Dracula and you see what a predator he is, what a dark and dangerous thing he is, you still think to yourself, okay, but just hear me out. Dracula is a bisexual deviant, and I need him in my life. I really do. Like so many people, my life would be greatly improved by a little bit of Dracula. Maybe a little bit more unhinged, just hear me out. The entire cast of If We Were Villains. This is an unhealthy and toxic group of pretentious college students who live and breathe Shakespeare, who speak Shakespeare lines like it's a normal thing to do in their day-to-day lives. They get drunk and have parties and continue to just quote Shakespeare, and I want to be at one of their orgy parties. From the world of fantasy, just hear me out, Angua, from Terry Pratchett's The Watch books in the Discworld. And it's not for the reasons you might think. Yes, Angua's a werewolf, and yes, I'd like to spend time with her when she's in her werewolf form specifically. That's weird, I admit, yeah, sure, okay. But what's really hear me out about this situation? Angua's a cop. I'm sorry, I know. I know. And finally, just hear me out on this one. Grenouille from Perfume. Kind of a Dracula situation, but despite the increasingly unhinged and strange events of this book, Grenouille is still human. And that fact somehow makes him a much darker character than Dracula. At least Dracula is a vampire. You can remove yourself from him a little bit, but Grenouille is a person, and easily just as much of a monster as Dracula. And I need him. I want him. I must have him. And now we turn to my patrons and all of their weird and unhinged hear me out characters. But we'll start with a perfectly reasonable one. Kathy says, hear me out, Charlie from Starter Villain. I'm not going to disagree with that. Charlie's great. Kathy says, I like his wit, his sarcasm, and his ability to keep going despite the craziness. Or maybe it's John Scalzi that I have the crush on. Or maybe I just want to live in a world with hyper-intelligent talking spy cats and unionized dolphins. It sure beats our current one. And Kathy, I do not disagree. I'd rather live in any world that John Scalzi creates. And just based on his writing and his characters alone, I think I've got a crush on Scalzi too. A few of my patrons mention characters from books that I haven't read. Some of them are books that I really want to read, and so this just made me even more intrigued, and this first one is absolutely the case. Melissa asked if I've read The Kingdoms by Natasha Pulley. Now, I have read some Natasha Pulley. I really enjoyed The Watchmaker of Filigree Street and its sequel, but that's it so far. She wrote a sci-fi novel that came out this year about Mars. It's a sci-fi romance about fascism. I can't remember the details, but I really want to pick it up when it comes out in paperback. Sounds great, really interested. But no, Melissa, I have not read The Kingdoms. But Melissa's hear me out is the character of Jo. The Kingdoms is a historical fiction / fantasy novel about an alternative version of the UK. It's 1898 and the hero, Jo, has some sort of amnesia. London is a French colony, and his only clue to his past is a 100-year-old postcard of a Scottish lighthouse in the Outer Hebrides. It says, "Come home if you remember," and it's signed M. I mean, who can resist this setup? Now, Jo is great, but Melissa says that the character that actually stole her heart is a Royal Navy officer named Missouri Kite. That is such a good name. He's a little bit broken, irascible, and somehow dastardly and upstanding at the same time. Think Edward Rochester without the Attic wife on the high seas. Okay, Yes, sold. So dashing and romantic, but I do realise this also reveals my shameful secret that I love Edward Rochester. Even with all the very obvious problems, the attic wife, the fortune teller disguise, big fat lie, etc, etc. Amazing answer. Then we have Rachel, who I know is a big fan of monsters in fiction. And Rachel said, I really adore Shasha Shen from John Wiswell's book, Someone You Can Build a Nest In. I have heard great things about this book. I need to check it out. People are going crazy about this thing right now. I've heard it's a very queer horror monster romance situation. I'm very intrigued. Rachel said she's a cute and sweet monster and I enjoy reading from her perspective. I can't wait to find out how much of an unhinged hear me out this is once I've actually read the book. Tove's hear me out is from Octavia Butler's Dawn. Now, I'm a big fan of Octavia Butler, but I have not read Dawn. And this is what Tove said. Now, I know that chemical capture bond is an abusive manipulation topic, but if you could only feel what I felt when Nikanj slipped his ooly tentacle arms around my neck, if you could only feel how I felt when he stimulated arousal through my brain chemistry alone in a way specific only to me, you would get it. You might hate yourself for being groomed as a Judas goat. You may resent that you can never stand the touch of another man again, or be furious at how separation from it, from that alien colonizer, drives your body wild, but you would understand and shiver in that terrible, beautiful understanding. That is one of the best things I've ever read. Alice just said, in middle school, I crushed hard on the Amazons from classical mythology. It took until my late 20s to realize that that was because I wanted to be someone who could cut off their breasts and scorn straight cis men. I love this so much. Rose said, I don't even know if this fits because he's hot as hell and I make no apologies. Cutter Tam from ElfQuest? Have not read it. Let me know if you agree, because I don't know. This next one honestly might be my favourite. Lucky Pence said, okay, hear me out. Hong Chi-gong from The Legend of the Condor Heroes. I am a huge fan of those books. I rarely talk about them. I really should reread them and make a video about them because The Legend of the Condor Heroes is such a great series of Chinese fantasy books. They're from a specific Chinese genre of fiction called wuxia, and I love those books to bit. They are campy and fun and schlocky and silly and full of heart. Lucky says Hong Chi-gong loves food. He isn't afraid to be a bit silly. He's banging at kung fu and isn't afraid to pass on his power to a woman. And then this answer got even better when Lucky suggested the Crowder House from Just Like Home. Now, if you've paid a lot of attention to my channel for the past few months, you might notice this book as a thing I keep saying I'm going to read and then don't. I'm a big fan of Sarah Gailey and this thing has been sitting on my TBR for months. Every single month I look at this thing and I think, yeah, I'm gonna, and then I just don't. I just keep not reading it. But I'm so glad that someone actually picked a haunted house as a hear me out because I was looking at the haunted houses behind me and thinking, which one of those would I And I came away with none, actually. So Lucky has really come through for me. It is indeed a spooky house. I would still like to smooch it. Brilliant answer, 10 out of 10, love it. Laura Osborne said, as a kid I had the biggest crush on Butler from Artemis Fowl, which I confess I never read as a kid because I wasn't a kid that read books. And also that one kid on an Animorphs cover who turns into a tiger. Now, in adulthood, I've gone full monster lover. We've got to give it up to the classics and say, hear me out, Frankenstein's creature. Absolutely. Poor baby. This is a really fun answer because it's not a character, but a writer. I think I have the hots for Marjane Satrapi. I was watching interviews with her and Art Spiegelman recently, and she gives zero fucks and was smoking like a trooper, and I was just like, ha! That is amazing. She's incredible. Great answer. Agnes said, I am so fed up with humans right now. I would date the cute spider Ralph from Rachel Harrison's novel Cackle. Again, I am a fan of Rachel Harrison, but I haven't read that one. He's fuzzy, cheery, and does adorable things like march his legs, sleep in a tiny bed with a sponge as a mattress, cuddle carnations, blow a tiny party horn, and use the remote to pick home makeover shows and cooking competitions. Oh my god, what a little sweetheart. Eve Ballard picked Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye. Absolutely not the only one to do that. I bet I'm gonna have people in the comments say Holden Caulfield. He's immature, hypocritical, unbelievably cynical, and even a little misogynistic. But in my view, he is a tragic hero, a massively flawed but nonetheless affable and lovable character who must be protected at all costs. And I definitely wish he was real. And we're gonna finish on an absolute banger. 1D said, "Hear me out, the wild things from Where the Wild Things Are." No judgment, only respect. Let me know in the comments your hear me out characters from books. And if you enjoyed all these comments from my patrons, you can also become one. Without these patrons, this channel would not exist at all. So if you want to keep me going and if you want to be part of videos like this one, you can support me on Patreon. Thank you in advance and subscribe for books.